John Wesley was born in 1703. He was the son of a pastor. And he was exceptionally bright and loved school and went to school, completed studies at a little place you might have heard of called Oxford. I guess it's okay. And he got done at Oxford, and when he was 23 years old, he was done, and he was ordained in 1726. And in the 2 years later, he went to Savannah, Georgia. I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to make a name for myself. I'm going to go serve and preach to all those heathen colonists. And he went to Georgia, and the 2 years went by, and he was kind of a flop. At least he felt that way. See, he was an outstanding scholar. He was exceptionally bright. And he came from a great family. And he found out that all of that is probably not even enough, or not the key to the whole thing. He had all the education in the world. He had all the intelligence in the world. And he was relying on all the talent and intelligence and scholarship and all those things. And he found out that he led this very frustrated life. He continued to try to do good. He continued to try to succeed. He continued to try to make his mark. But he was frustrated. And this is his words. He said, I found myself, I was indeed fighting continually, but was not conquering. I fell and rose only to fall again. And he moved back to England after this 2 years. The funny thing was, as he was going back in the ship back to England, he found himself in this group called the Moravians. And there was a storm at sea, and it got pretty hairy for a while. At time, the ships weren't that big, and they were buffeted a lot by the wind and waves. And during one kind of intense storm, a lot of people were really on edge and despairing for their life. And he found themselves in the middle of these Moravians who were calm and cool and collected and singing and praying. And he was wondering, what on earth is this about? Maybe I need to find out some more. Now let me tell you, even though I have Romans 8, 1 through 4 here, on second thought, I thought I'll go a little deeper into Romans chapter 8. I could use anything in chapter 8 for this passage, but I'm going to go through verses 9 through 11. You, however, are not in the realm of the flesh, but are in the realm of the Spirit, if indeed the Spirit of God lives in you. And if anyone does not have the Spirit of Christ, they do not belong to Christ. But if Christ is in you, even though your body is subject to death because of sin, the Spirit gives life because of righteousness. And if the Spirit of Him who raised Jesus from the dead is living in you, He who raised Christ from the dead will also give life to your mortal bodies because of His Spirit who lives in you. The reality of the situation is Wesley was struggling. And he felt that his life was a failure. Or he felt like there had to be more. He did a lot of things, and I think a lot like maybe other people, I don't know, he goes and he spends time at a church in the South and comes away from it feeling a little less than good. I have no idea what he's talking about, but we'll just go on from that. And in the middle of one of his struggles, Wesley was asked to go to a meeting. He was asked to go to a Bible study. And in his own journal, Wesley wrote, I went very unwillingly. Have you ever been there? He didn't say, I kind of didn't want to go, or I had better things to do. He said, I went very unwillingly. And as he was at this meeting, he found they were reading something written by Martin Luther, who we talked about a couple weeks ago, reading his introduction to the book of Romans. Now, I get that. If you ask me, if I had to throw away every book in the Bible and could only save one, the book I would keep is Romans. And it's not even close. And if I had to throw away every chapter in the Bible, could only keep one, it would be Romans chapter 8. And if I had to throw away every passage in the Bible, it can only keep one, it would be Romans 8, 1 through 11. And so I understand, they were reading through this introduction to Romans, and Luther was writing a section on simply trusting God through faith. And then Wesley wrote, at that moment, it was in May of 1738, he said, he felt his heart strangely warmed. Up until now, Wesley had been relying on everything else. He'd been relying on intelligence. He'd been relying on education. He'd been relying on scholarship. And all those things are good. I'm not putting down any of those things. Now, I've heard people get up in a church and say, we got too many doctors in the pulpit. Got so many doctors in the pulpit, you think God was sick. I'm not one of those people. If God can use a simple person that's not too bright, just think what God can do with a heart that's completely yielded to Him, with a little background and a little scholarship and a little education. I'm not putting it down. But Wesley was totally relying on the one. But something happened to him on that day. For the first time, he said, I felt my heart strangely warmed. See, there had been no personal knowledge, no personal interaction. Christianity had been a thing, had been a system, had been a checklist, had been things to do, good things to do, bad things to avoid, good things to believe, bad things not to believe. It had all been this thing to do and attain, but he had never, ever really had personal interaction. And then totally unwittingly, and this is a surprise to him, he felt his heart strangely warmed. If I went around this room, and I know a lot of stories in this room, and asked you about a story when you felt your heart strangely warmed, I would have a lot of different stories. I have people who would tell me some big, huge day and emotions were flowing and you felt different one minute, you did the other minute. And then I could talk to other people and went, well, no, it kind of wasn't like that. I was just kind of decided, well, I've tried everything else. I'll follow Christ now. With all the emotion of a Ritz cracker. Well, which one's right? Both of them. We have tried to codify these experiences and say, if you follow Christ, it has to look like this, be like this, react like this. Phooey. You know what I think is required from us? We just need to be open to God in our own lives. And He who began a good work in you will be faithful to complete it. John Wesley was open. He was searching. He was willing. That's why he said he felt his heart strangely warmed. I don't know. Don't know Wesley personally, of course. I wonder if he was one of these people who didn't react to the world emotionally, was all logic and black and white, and didn't really, go up and down on the emotional scale. That's why he said, I felt my heart strangely warmed. I'm not used to having my heart warm. Or maybe he didn't expect it to happen then. Or maybe he said, wait a minute, I didn't even go willingly. I had other things to do. I wanted to have other things happen. I didn't want to go to this stupid meeting. And then he found himself strangely warmed. The reason why God doesn't really work in our lives often as God should is that we tend to pull back. And here's where we tend to pull back is that time, like the prophet Isaiah said, Lord, here am I, send me. We tend to not just be open and present ourselves to God. So Wesley started to say, wait a minute, as talented as you might be, as good of a job as you might be, as wonderful a citizen as you might be, all these other good things that happen in your life, really where God really starts to work is when your heart can be strangely warmed and have this personal knowledge. The other thing that Wesley did that was different from the other people in his life, from the other people at the time, is he said, you know what, this Christianity is more than just a private you and God kind of thing. Oh, Jesus is my personal Savior. We walk hand in hand through fields of flowers, and He affirms me and sits me down in the shade, and it's a wonder. Okay, that's all nice, but Christianity is not just you and God. There's other people involved in this process. He set up this systems of accountability. He said not only do you have to be a person of faith, you need to be open. You need to have other people be able to speak into your life. See, holiness, the Christian life, is transparent, or at least it should be. And they looked at the people around them and said, come and see. Come and hang out with us. Kind of like Jesus did. There needs to be someone in your life who can look at you and say, I know you think that's a great idea, but you're full of it right now. And you need to stop that. Now, I didn't say you need to have that person in your life and you need to feel wonderful every time they do that. No, I didn't say that. Yes, you don't like it. There's reasons why you don't like it. And it's possible that often the person who does that in your life is the beautiful person that you married. And while I'm not asking you to like it every time, or any of the time, you need to be open to it. Or at least a little more open than you are right now. Wesley had these accountability groups. People in your life that can say, I need you to at least think about this. That's how we grow. There's another thing that Wesley always talked about is the importance of love of neighbor. There's a chapter about this in the Bible, and unfortunately, most people think it's the chapter that was written for us to read at weddings. When really the chapter, 1 Corinthians 13, has nothing to do with a wedding. Not that it's inappropriate at a wedding, but that's not why it's there. Paul had just talked to a group of people, he's talked to the church in Corinth, who said, you know what? We're a little more Christian than you are. Because look at all the stuff. We have the gift of healing. We have the gift of speaking in tongues. We have this gift and that gift. We have all these gifts. And if you were up at our level, you would have all these things that we're able to do. Look at us. Aren't we good? And Paul's response is after saying, yes, there's this gift, that gift, the other gift. And then he pauses and says at the end of chapter 12, and now let me show you the most excellent way. Love is patient. Love is kind. It does not envy. It does not boast. It is not proud. It's not rude. Even in 2021, it's not self-seeking. It's not TikTok ready. Sorry, I'm doing my own translation here. It's not easily angered. It keeps no record of wrongs. It does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth. It always protects, always trusts, always perseveres. Earlier when he says, if I have a gift of prophecy and can fathom all mysteries, and if I have a faith that can move mountains, that's a good person. But if I don't have love, I am nothing. This holy life that Wesley often talked about changes how we look at other people. It changes how we interact with other people. And the interesting thing, if you find out, go back in history and read about these people that flowed from Wesley called the Methodists, They were at the forefront of a lot of different movements, including the ending of slavery, prison reform, living conditions for people. Real holiness, real Christianity will make a difference to your neighbor. Your faith should make a difference to your spouse, to your kids, to your friends, to a world around us. I was on a podcast this week, and someone was asking me the question about what the church can do moving forward. And one of the things I said was, perhaps one of the reasons we see so many things going on in our world today is because for a couple generations now, in a lot of key ways, there are elements that the world has looked at us to be different, and we haven't been different. If our homes were different, if our marriages were different, our world today would be different. If our faith was different, our world would be different. Yes, you can be forgiven. There's room to fall. But there's a point that is also true. There's also a point we use that as a crutch. Holiness engages in the best interest of other people. Holiness seeks to make a difference in this world, not just wait for the next one. Christianity is for this life. Should make a difference here. Should make things better now. There is no next life that's disconnected from this one anyway, if we read our New Testaments. And that's probably what he's best known for, is this idea of holiness. He talked a lot about being transformed into the likeness of Jesus Christ. Holiness, as Matt well said, is both outward and inward. See, Wesley, early in his life, I think, was all about the outward. It was all about the performance of the means of grace. It was all about the robes. It was all about the stuff. And it was all about doing everything right. Someone asked me, and it's been about a year or so ago, and it took me about 15 years to figure it out. And I'm going to be completely honest with you. They said, "What did you learn in Marshall, Texas?" Well, I learned a lot of weird stuff. I learned that fire ants don't bite one at a time. They wait till they get on you and they all bite at the same time. I learned that. I learned that there's a big 10-foot tall weed that's poisonous, but they eat it down there. Call it poke salad. I learned about that. I learned that, sorry if I'm offending anybody, I learned that grits have taste. I learned all kind of stuff. But 10 years later, they go, "After your experience, what did you learn, Marshall?" I said, "I don't know. I really don't know. I really don't know." Because I was really diligent. I was studious. I was sure I did everything right. I did everything like you're supposed to. The finances improved. We kept track of it. The church grew. Everything was good. I was doing everything like you're supposed to do it. I was sure that I was performing every duty as best as I could to a high level. And I'm wired that way. It's kind of important to me anyway. It probably took me 15, 20 years to figure out what I learned in Marshall, Texas. And I'll tell you what I learned. Are you ready? And this is true. I did all that stuff right, but I never loved him. I never loved him. Now, while it might be true that they gave me reason not to love them, that's no reason not to love them. It took me 20 years to figure that out. Wesley was figuring that out in 1738. The importance, everything has to flow from love. That's the heart of the matter. Some of us remember times and places where holiness was only outward. You might have grown up in a place like that. You had to dress a certain way. There was a code, Used to be I could go in a restaurant and I could tell you who was part of my tribe by how they dressed. Oddly, it was an odd-fitting short-sleeve dress shirt and a tie that only came down to here. It was really a bad look. But it was all a certain... Holiness was only outward. There's a checklist you had to perform. If you did this and did that and did this, but didn't do this and didn't do that, then you're okay. And trust me, there's a lot of things I don't ever want to do, I don't think should be a part of my life, but not because it's on the checklist, but because it's an outflow of something that's taken place inside. So we went on with our clothing styles and checklists. And the trouble with that is, I think it's what Wesley was talking about coming home from Savannah, Georgia. It felt cold and distant, even unattainable. Because there'll always be a day where something on the checklist doesn't happen. And you know what? Checking off a checklist is always easier than a real transformation. See, holiness changes our exterior world, but it should only change it as a consequence of something that's happened on the interior world. What Wesley said was his heart being strangely warmed. It was strangely warm not because he was close to the fireplace, but because of an inward renewal. I suppose I have a couple other bits of news about it, and one is this. I think our Christian life, our pursuit of holiness, is not ever a final destination. Think about I've been married now 34 and a half years. That's right. 34 and a half years. Imagine me saying, I'm married. I'm never going to get any more married. Dear, let's go out to dinner. I'm ready. My gym shorts, Cheeto-stained t-shirt. Here we go. After a while, I think people get a little tired of that. I'm married now. You're stuck with me. I shower once every Saturday night, whether I need it or not. That wouldn't work either. It's a journey. Holiness is not an end product off a checklist, but rather it's also a desire, a motivation inside to wholeheartedly pursue Christ. There will be a change. There will be a transformation, but there'll never, ever, ever be a perfected person. Again, we should use that in the right way. We should not hold that out to where we're always frustrated, always think that we're no good, never getting anywhere. But we should also think about that when there's someone else in our life that may not be having a perfect day. How many times have you seen someone who is part of a group or part of someone, and then all of a sudden 10 years later, 12 years later, someone disappoints them for something, and they go, oh, I'm out now. They forgot my birthday, and they walk away. We can't expect perfection from ourselves. We also shouldn't expect it from others. There's one other text, Paul writing again in 2 Corinthians. He says, therefore, we do not lose heart, though outwardly we are wasting away. Yet inwardly we are being renewed day by day. For our light and momentary troubles are achieving for us an eternal glory that far outweighs them all. When you kind of get clued in on this concept that Wesley talked about, it is everywhere in the New Testament. 25 years ago, I didn't understand this. Outwardly, we are wasting away. And at a much younger age, 35 years ago, we were talking, Michelle and I, about growing old together. And that just is kind of a romantic concept. until you get there. And it's not quite the romantic concept anymore. We got the calendar, we got doctor's appointments, we talk each day. Much of our breakfast conversation consists of what hurts today. So we're right in the middle of what we said would be this wonderful romantic thing and growing old together. I know about that. But inwardly, we should be being renewed day by day. Because there's something inward that changes everything. There's one other thing that I am learning. I was learning it 30 years ago, still learning it 20 years ago, still learning it today, that I think sometimes we missed. This quest for holiness and righteousness does not spring from moral purity. It springs from love. Completely from love. The thing about moral purity is it can get pretty exclusive pretty quick. The group gets smaller and smaller and smaller until the group is just 2 or 3 people, and we compare about how pure we are. At least I am. I'm not too sure about you, but you're still here. And everybody else has fallen short of our ideal. And it gets to be pretty exclusive, and it gets to be there pretty quick. And I think Wesley was pretty devout, and I bet part of his frustration early was everybody else was just not quite as devout as they should have been. But holiness doesn't spring from devoutness or piety. It springs from love. It springs from love. There's one other thing that Wesley said that we've always been about, and I think is right. And that is when we come to Christ, often we bring all our baggage and all the mess and everything else, and we kind of just lay it down at God's feet. And you say, here it is, here's my mess. And God doesn't push us off. He goes, welcome, my child. You're part of this family. I love you. You are 100% in. That is wonderful. But oftentimes after that, there comes a time and a place where we might have to give our all to Christ. It's one thing when we say, hey, here's the mess I made. Clean it up. God says, got it. But then afterwards he says, you know what? Now that I've got your mess, I want all of you. Every last bit. Your hopes, your dreams, your frustrations. Just think, look what I did with your mess. Think what I could do if I had you. And Wesley talked a lot about that. Afterwards, there is this thing where God wants to take your entire life. I go back, as I always do, to a story my grandma McQuarter told me. She told me of being a young girl on the farm up on Likens Chapel Road. That means nothing to you, but it means something to me. And she was up on the farm, a farmhouse. And frequently as the daughter, she was one of three girls, Mabel, Henrietta, and Zelma. I never knew my great-grandmother, but she was not talented at naming children. Those are the 3 sisters. Why didn't your grandmother go by her middle name? Because it was Gertrude, which is worse. She said we all had our tasks. We all had things we were supposed to do. Inward, outward, we had the things we're supposed to do. And my thing was I was supposed to clean the entire house. I was supposed to dust it from top to bottom. And I busy set out doing my task that I was supposed to do. And I went back to my mother, her name was Callie. And I said, Mom, I got the entire house done. I've dusted everything that I should have. And she looked at me and said, everything? Your bedroom? Yes, Mom. What about the shelves behind the door? And then she said, I had to go back up because I thought no one would notice the shelves behind the door. Here's the truth of the matter. There comes a time in life when God wants yourselves behind the door. The part that you think no one notices. Because if you want your heart strangely warmed, if you want God to use you in a dynamic way, He needs all of it, not just some. And that's what Wesley taught us. That's all throughout the New Testament and still good today.